Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be recommending 10 young adult sci-fi or fantasy books, and I feel like standalone fantasy and sci-fi books are really hard to find. I just did this similar video with my adult standalone sci-fi and fantasy book, so I'll link that up in the cards if you're interested in watching it. But sometimes we just want a one and done story. We don't want to follow 5 books and a story that goes over multiple books. We just want the story and the conflict to be wrapped up in one book. So that's why I'm going to be recommending 10 books to you today. Some of these books do have companion novels, but you do not have to read the companion novel in order to have a complete story in the first book, and I'll let you know if these books do have companion novels. But before we go ahead and get on into the list, if you are not already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I post new content. I post new videos every Saturday and every Wednesday and sometimes on Monday. Also, don't forget to check down in the description box for links to all of my social media, including my Discord and my Patreon. These books are in no particular order, but I'm going to leave timestamps down below. I'm going to leave my 2 science fiction books at the end if you just want to skip to those. The first book I'm going to be talking about is The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black. This is a paranormal vampire story, and I personally love vampire stories. I know that they got super burned out a couple of years ago, but I am ready for a resurgence of vampires, and these are not nice vampires. These are horrible, gross vampires. But in this world, vampirism has been treated like a disease, and people can get this disease and become a vampire. So they have rounded up all of the vampires and put them into cold towns. So they kind of live in these self-sufficient quarantine areas, but they are just not well kept. And people who are at risk for being turned into a vampire because they've been exposed to them or bitten by them are put into these cold towns. So we follow a girl named Tana who wakes up one day from a party and everyone at the party is dead except for her, and they were killed by vampires. With the help of her ex-boyfriend and another guy, they end up tracing what happened back to this cold town and end up infiltrating this cold town and experiencing it all on their own. This book was definitely dark and a bit gritty and a bit bloody, and I feel like for YA, it definitely had a mature story and just mature scenes with regards to just the disturbingness of it, not so much like a little bit graphically violent, but just when I was reading it, I was like, oh, that's disturbing, that's gross, and I just ate it up. I loved it so much. So if you're someone who is looking for a good vampire story and you don't want it to, span a whole bunch of books, definitely check this out. If you like Holly Black, definitely check this out because it is definitely a dark vampire book. The next book we have is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, and this is a book that follows a girl named Alice, and Alice's grandmother used to write stories about this place called the Hazelwood, and as Alice gets older, she learns that there might be some truth to what her grandmother was writing and that the Hazelwood might actually exist. One day her mother goes missing and Alice thinks that she got taken to the Hazelwood, so she embarks on a mission to go find out the truth about everything. To be completely honest, I didn't love this book. I think I gave it 3 stars. I really disliked the first half of the book, but the second half of the book, where they are actually inside the Hazelwood, was great. It was dark. It's a dark forest, dark fairy tales. Things are not what they seem. It's weird, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So if you're willing to get through the first half of the book that's kind of slow and you're kind of wondering when the book is going to pick up, there is good payoff at the end. This book does have a companion novel that follows one of the male characters that we meet in this book, but the story of the Hazelwood definitely wraps up in this book and you don't need to continue on. Then we have House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This is a retelling of the grim fairy tale of the 12 Dancing Princesses, and this book follows a girl named Annalie, and she lives on a manor by the ocean, and she has a whole bunch of sisters, and slowly her sisters have been dying, so the people are wondering if her family is cursed, and Annalie is starting to wonder if she's going to be next. So she starts investigating these murders and what's going on, and she unravels this whole mystery and this whole paranormal thing going on. And I love this book. I ate it up. It was so atmospheric. It was dark. There were just some scenes in there that I can't describe, but like anything but a horror scene. There's definitely elements of horror in this book. And then we have the fairy tale retelling combined with fantastical elements and a romance. So this book has got all of these different elements that work together just to create a really cool, dark, horror YA fantasy book. And I highly recommend it if you like atmospheric writing and you don't mind a little bit of dark creepiness to your stories. Next, we have Heartless by Marissa Meyer. This is the same author that wrote the Lunar Chronicles. This is an Alice in Wonderland retelling, but not so much Alice in Wonderland. It actually follows the Queen of Hearts, and this is a Queen of Hearts origin story. The Queen of Hearts' name is Catherine, and when we're introduced to her, all she wants to do is open her own bakery. She loves baking, and she's kind of in a situation where everyone is trying to control her decisions in her life, and something happens and she ends up being forced to do something, and that's how she turns into the Queen of Hearts. I personally loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I just felt like the development of the story was just so well done, and the way that Marissa Meyer created these situations to make Catherine turn into the Queen of Hearts was just, it was so good. And then we have a main character called, I think his name's Jest, who is like the love interest to Catherine. I'm pretty sure it's Jest. He was a blast to read about. I loved reading about him. I thought that their dynamic was so good. And this book really tugs at your heartstrings, and you definitely feel for our main character. So it's a really unique take on like an Alice in Wonderland inspired story, and a really, really good origin story to a villain. Next, we have Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young. This is a Viking inspired world and follows a girl named Aelin, and she is part of this clan, this warrior clan. And during a fight years ago, her brother, they thought, got killed, but then they have a skirmish with this clan, and she sees her brother fighting for the enemy. So she embarks on a mission to find out if it actually was her brother, why he's alive, and why he decided to betray their clan. And this book, I originally got it from my library. I loved it so much that I decided to get my own copy. But just the world was just so interesting. I love the inspirations that Adrienne Young drew from like old cultures. I loved our main character, the interaction with her brother, and just his journey and why he made the decisions that he did. It was just a really good, quick read, like nothing I've ever read before. And there is a companion novel to this too, but it follows a different character and a different like set of circumstances. So you can definitely read Sky in the Deep without reading the rest of the books in the series. Next, we have An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. I think this is her debut book. But in this world, Fae exist and they live kind of along with humans. But these Fae are unable to create any works of art. They're unable to create like paintings or bake anything or anything that is considered artistic. So they often employ humans to do these things for them. One day, Isabel is hired to paint a portrait of this Fae, but she paints him with these human emotions on his face, which is just completely unacceptable to the Fae. So he ends up kind of kidnapping her, taking her back to the Fae world to kind of answer for her crimes. This book is so atmospheric. So we're following Isabel and Rook, the Fae, as they are traveling through the forest back to the Fae world. And just that whole part of the book, the journey part, I absolutely loved because just the writing was beautiful. And the interaction between Rook and Isabel was just so well done because, you know, Fae actually are glamored. They are made to look like beautiful people, but they actually are not. So Isabel having to come to terms with that and to learn to love him despite what he looks like. I just thought that theme was just so well explored. I will say that the ending to this did feel extremely rushed, but I felt like that with her other book too, so that just might be her writing style. But all in all, I feel like this is a good standalone fantasy if you're looking for something that has to do with Fae, really beautiful writing, and a really good romance. Next, we have Hunted by Megan Spooner. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and it follows a girl named Yeva who is a hunter. Her dad has been teaching her how to hunt, and they live in like a very snowy part of the world. It has almost like Russian influences to it. One day, Yeva's father goes missing, so she takes it upon herself to find out what happened to him. Through her investigation, she comes across the Beast, and he takes her captive to his castle, just like the Beauty and the Beast story. And the reason I like Hunted so much is that this book doesn't focus so much on the romance as it does the growth of the main character. I mean, there is a romance and it's really well done, but it actually explores the emotions of Yeva and as well as the Beast more than focusing on their dynamic together. And I absolutely loved that. I was not expecting that. It's actually more about an internal journey, dealing with wanderlust and feeling those things and trying to reconcile your life to the one that you want. And it's got such deep themes and it was so well done. Not to mention the Beauty and the Beast story itself was really well done. This is definitely one of my favorite books of all time and I cannot recommend it enough. The next book I'm going to be talking about is The Star-Touched Queen by Roshani Chokshi. This is an Indian folklore inspired book, and once again, I'm going to put it out there that I was not a huge fan of this book, but there are things about it that I liked that I thought that warranted inclusion on this list. The first thing would be the writing. The writing is incredibly purple. It's very flowery, and that actually does help create the whimsy that I think the author was trying to portray in this book. It's very whimsical. But in this book, we follow a girl named Maya, and she has been kind of cursed her whole life based on her horoscope. And her father ends up arranging a political marriage to this prince or king. And Maya does end up marrying him, and they do grow to love one another and have a relationship with one another. But then she learns that her husband has actually been hiding things from her and has these deep, dark secrets, and she kind of has to deal with that and find out what's going on. So it's definitely a very interesting book, like nothing I've ever read before. The plot was really interesting. The magic was really interesting. I did find it a bit confusing at times, just with how whimsical this was and just kind of like the nonsensical situations that they found them in addition to the writing. So I would recommend this if you liked her other books or if you really like purpley prose. It reminded me a lot of like The Night Circus with regards to the writing style and just the way that scenes were developed by the author. So I feel like if you liked The Night Circus, then you probably would like this. I personally didn't love it, but it definitely does have some good attributes. Next, I have two science fiction books. So definitely not a lot of YA sci-fi in this list, unfortunately. But the first one is The Loneliest Girl in the Universe by Lauren James. This is a really short sci-fi book, and it follows a girl named Rami, and Rami is on a trip speeding away from Earth to this other planet, and unfortunately, everybody on the ship, including her parents, have tragically died, and Rami is having to live on her own on the ship and really has no one that's upbringing her. She has no one that's raising her. And she actually ends up intercepting a message from a ship that is supposed to be coming to help her. So she starts talking to the other person on the ship, and there are entries like email entries that we read between the two of them. And then she quickly starts to learn that there may be something more to this person than he is letting on. And there's definitely a lot of thriller aspects to this because there's some suspense, there's some uncertainty, and there's definitely a lot of like almost coming of age themes in this book because our main character is very naive and kind of has to learn some things. So I honestly couldn't put this book down. It really does grip you. I wanted to know what happened, and because it's so short, it's really easy to read in like one sitting. But I do recommend if you like YA thrillers and you like science fiction, just combining the two, I really enjoyed it. And finally, we have The Host by Stephanie Meyer. I actually really like this book. I feel like a lot of people give Stephanie Meyer a lot of crap because of her Twilight series, which I haven't read in years, so I don't know if my opinion's changed or not, but this book I remember reading and really enjoying because I found the concept really, really interesting. So we follow a girl named Melanie in a world where aliens have invaded, and they're almost like parasites that are put into your brain, and then they take over you, and you are literally the host. So we are following Melanie, but it's not Melanie. It's actually this alien that's inhabiting Melanie's body, and we're following her experiences. But at the same time, the host's consciousness is still conscious. So we are reading about the interactions between Melanie and the alien. And I just found that it was a really good kind of exploration into what it means to be human and just showing compassion for others, even if they're not like yourself. Not to mention, there's a good romance in here, as her books have. So, personally, I really like The Host. I think that it's a great standalone novel and definitely one worth checking out. Okay, you guys, that is it for 10 young adult fantasy and science fiction books that I recommend. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these or if you have any standalone recommendations for me, and I will see you guys soon in another video. Goodbye.